Now, the conscious mind is 5% of the total mind, and it's made up of things like logic and reasoning, which gives rise to our will and our creative abilities. So when that analytical mind begins to close off and it separates the conscious mind from the subconscious mind, there's been enough research in scientific journals to say, well, after the age of 7 or 10, pretty much the ability for your child to learn languages or develop what we call plastic changes tends to slow down, because now they have to get beyond that particular analytical mind. Now, as we begin to grow up and we begin to interact with the environment and we begin to respond to tough conditions in our life, the brainwave patterns move into what's called beta brainwave patterns. And beta brainwave patterns are what you're listening to me right now with. Beta is when the outer world is more real than the inner world. And in beta, you're more concerned with being able to pay attention with what's going on in your external environment. And the job of the brain is to create coherence between the outer world and the inner world. And as you begin to create meaning between the outer world and the inner world, the brain further shapes and develops as a result of that interaction. And we could say then that the personality really is the result of how you think, how you act, and how you feel. And so I always tell my children that your personality creates your personal reality. And if you want to change something in your life, then on a fundamental level, you have to look at the thoughts you're thinking to see if they're serving you. Notice the behaviors that you're demonstrating and see if those are loving to yourself. And begin to look at the emotions that you've memorized that become part of your identity. And children begin to understand this very naturally, because the law with children that I've believed from the time my children were very young is that if you give them the facts, they will interpret the laws. So because of mirror neurons, your children are paying attention to more of what you do than what you say. So you can't say to your kids, clean your room, and have a messy room. You understand? Because they're going to look at your room subconsciously, automatically. And I was doing an interview for this book, and they said, can you tell me about the terrible twos? I said, it's really simple. What do you do the first year of your child's life? Oh, look how cute he is. Look how cute she is. Look. Oh, and then all of a sudden, at 1 year old, what happens? They stand up, right? And they stand up, and their brain is so neuroplastic, and they go, wow, look at this vase. I wonder how it's made. Oh, it holds water. And then the child begins to interact with the environment out of curiosity, pulling things, breaking things, and then what do? Yeah. No! No! And you do that for a whole year, and then you say at 2 years old, put your shoes on, and what's the child say? No! It's mirror neurons. It's only mirroring behavior. So we know then that children pay attention because of those mirror neurons more based on what they observe than what they're told. Now, I also believe that parenting is the result of two things. It's the result of love or logistics. That's it. That it's either a problem with love or a problem with logistics. And if you've raised kids, you'll begin to realize that you have to set boundaries that are comfortable, and that they have to honor those boundaries, and that you have to nurture and culture and help them develop and begin to understand the distinction between when they're doing something that's going to cause growth for them or something that's going to begin to ultimately cause displeasure or harm for them. And logistics, of course, is what? Did you pack your ballet shoes? Did you bring the baseball glove? What happened? You didn't tie your shoes. You got to go back and get your backpack. Where's your homework? It's all logistics. And so I've decided, after 23 years of raising kids, that it has everything to do with love and logistics. Now, I also believe that with children, that they learn primarily by allegory. And I use this principle with my children because I understood their brainwave patterns when they were young. And I found it very important when they were reacting to something in their life, or they were upset about something, or they were uncomfortable about something, as long as they weren't injured in some way and they were having some type of upset, my job with them was to shorten their emotional reaction. Because as I say in my lectures that I teach to adults, when you have a reaction to something in your life, there's a refractory period of chemicals that are created from that emotional reaction. And if you don't know how to control that emotional reaction, and you let that refractory period continue for hours or days, that turns into a mood. So your child has a mood because something happens that alters them emotionally. And then if they learn that that refractory period can continue for weeks or months, that develops into a temperament. And if you keep that refractory period going for years on end, that's called a personality trait. So they develop their personality trait based on their emotional reactions to conditions in their life. Now, aside from trauma and abuse and those really, really rough conditions that certain children are exposed to, our job as parents is to teach them that ability to become so neuroplastic that they can lay down the emotion and change gears. And you do them a great service if you give them the ability to be able to let go of the emotion. Now, as a result of that, I have another law which says never, ever, ever try to reason with your kid when they're emotional. Do you want to be reasoned with when you're emotional? Or do you want to be left alone? So you would rather be left alone until the chemicals wear off. And by the way, I tell my children, and this is a fact also scientifically, that those stress hormones, the chemicals that are created from an emotional reaction, 30 different chemicals, they last 90 seconds to 2 minutes. That's it. So what I did with my children was I always created things for them to do to break their pattern. We had trampolines. I live out in nature where we have horses, we have a garden, and so you break the pattern by causing them to shift their attention to something else. And wouldn't you agree as an adult that wouldn't it be nice for you to have the ability to shift your attention from something that's picking at you emotionally? Yes? So we teach that as a skill or as a way to develop certain behaviors, coping mechanisms. And my children to this day, all three of them, let go of things pretty naturally. When my children were going through emotional reactions, one of the things that I found really valuable for them was that when they were reacting to something, I wanted them to understand that there was always something or someone observing them. And that when you begin to see a child move out of balance, and as long as they're not physically hurt in any way, if you were to just stop what you were doing and turn around and look at them, and just observe them, they will notice that you're observing them, and they will become conscious of what they're doing. Now, I never ever interacted with them when they were having that emotional reaction. Of course, as long as they weren't injured in any way, I allowed them to run the course of that emotion. But the biggest point that I want to make is that I would wait till the evening, and I would climb in bed with them, and then I would talk about myself. I would say, look, I'm working on this thing, whatever it is, whether it was anger or whatever the emotion was. And I'd start really opening up to my children as if I was talking to an analyst. That honest. And what do you think my children would do all the time? They would say, God, I got so mad at Paris today. And then I'd say, I know, I saw you. And then the only important thing that I wanted them to understand is that when they reacted, they'd start telling me the story, and I'd say, you know what? I really don't care. What I care about is if it happened again, how would you do it differently? There's 2 times the door to the subconscious mind opens up. When you wake up in the morning, your brain chemistry changes, and you go from delta to theta to alpha to beta, to conscious awareness. Melatonin turns into serotonin, and those neurotransmitters get you up and going. When you go to bed at night, you go from what? Beta to alpha to theta to delta. So you're going down, and the door is already open. Exactly. So I would wait for my children to get in bed with them. I'd tell them about myself. We'd talk about their day. And then I'd say, listen, just tell me if the same thing happened tomorrow. I just want to know how you would do it differently. And they'd say, oh, well, I do this and I do that. And I'd say, really? If you did that, it would lead to this. Are you aware that that's what would happen? They say, oh, I didn't think about that. And so I would help them create a new strategy or a new plan to cope with the same experience. And because the research in neuroscience shows that you can actually install the neurological hardware ahead of the actual experience by mentally rehearsing what you're going to do, your brain begins to change to look like the event has happened. There's enough research to show that you can prime the brain and wake the circuits up, and the brain doesn't know the difference between the actual experience in external reality and what you rehearse in your internal reality. So I would ask them, after we got the model complete and really sound, I would ask them to repeat the model to me over and over again until they got it exactly the way they thought they could demonstrate it. So we can begin to install the neurological hardware ahead of the actual experience so that they have circuits in place to use when that situation comes up, and that's called evolution. Because new thoughts lead to new choices lead to new behaviors, and new behaviors lead to new experiences, and new experiences lead to new emotions, and new emotions are new information from the environment that begins to alter their genes epigenetically. And then those emotions drive their thoughts, and you begin to develop self-esteem and self-confidence and efficacy and everything that goes along with it.